Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Revival Motoring Podcast. We have a special guest on the line today. We have Tiernan from Tiernan AI YouTube channel. He has worked in the automotive media industry for, actually, we're going to find out exactly how long, because I'm not quite sure. A little bit of background and why Tiernan joins us today is the algorithm got me. The algorithm got me probably about a week and a half ago. His video was pushed to me. The thumbnail grabbed me in, the title grabbed me in. I watched it and I was pretty much blown away because this was a side of automotive media that I've not seen anybody talk about. So, Tiernan, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And a huge part of my job was making sure that content grabbed people. And that video, I applied what I know to making that thumbnail and making that title, expecting it to get maybe 1,000 views from people in the industry who were interested in the subject. And it broke 1 million views last night. So this is unexpected.
It's in just for kicks, million views. It's been up for 11 days. And how long have you had your actual YouTube channel itself, Auto T?
So that channel, I think I registered the original channel for that in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And I used that as a way to just release little videos that I would make that would be like, I like to go to track days. And so I do like track day videos, which are like the fireworks show of car videos. Like everybody makes them and nobody watches them. And I would release just these little edited commentaries or skits that I would make by myself because I just, I hadn't done any video production for a number of years and thought this is a fun way to combine my love of cars with my love of video. So I registered that channel in 2019. It didn't go anywhere. It had 50 subscribers 2 weeks ago, right? And then I got a job working in the industry, and so I just shut down that channel, made all the videos private, and then I relaunched it after I left my last job because I wanted to do something else with all the stuff I'd learned over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Something within the automotive realm, but different than the typical, like you said, tracking video, build video, etc.
Right. Yeah. It's the meta automotive content, right? It's the automotive content about automotive content, And we're at a point now where YouTube is so saturated with automotive content that there's very little space for anything that's new, but there's also a lot of space to actually say meaningful and interesting things about automotive content and how it gets made.
Right. And right. Because it's just
kind of like the content behind the content.
It is, because there's so much of it and it's so vast. Not everybody necessarily understands it or understands it. The cookies are being made, right? But does anybody know how to make the cookies? And those select few who do, kind of fall. It never really gets discussed. Let's put it that way.
It doesn't. And I found that a lot of it, I had to figure out a lot of things on my own because people they don't really share information all that freely about how different aspects of automotive content creation works, like how to work with manufacturers when you need a press loaner, for example. Yeah. There isn't a guidebook out there of somebody that has written that up and said, here's what you need to bring to a PR person that will convince them to give you a loaner car so you can make content with it.
Yep. I'd like to take a step back briefly, and you kind of answered this, but I figured I'd get a bit more details out of it. You've not always been in the automotive industry. What did you do before that?
So I kind of went through 2 specific career shifts in the last 25 years or so. I studied video production at a community college in the 90s, and that's kind of where I learned the basics, right? And then I went on to have an IT career that lasted for about 10 years. And then I decided I didn't want to do that. I wasn't particularly happy. And so I went to graduate school to pursue a PhD. And then I did that off and on for a couple of years. That was in philosophy, of all things. And that taught me how to do research and how to write very, very quickly, very efficiently. And it also taught me how to teach. And that translated perfectly to creating content because I started out as a writer, and you have to be able to write very accurate, very concise scripts very quickly. And then they need to be structured so that they're targeted for the audience's level of understanding, and the teaching experience really helped with that.
Right. I can see that translate
Yeah.
naturally.
And so when I was coming up to the end of my PhD program, I said, well, I don't actually want to have an academic job. And I'd already started writing freelance for automotive scripts. And so I said, you know what, I'll pursue this as a career. And that's what I did. But I've loved cars since I was like, probably my first thought was something about a car.
Oh, wow.
It's a very interesting thing to hear is automotive script, because it's not something that I think many viewers on YouTube realize how scripted certain things are.
Yeah, and it's sort of necessity, because if you let people just kind of ramble like I'm doing, they'll say a ton of stuff that doesn't need to be said, right? Whatever I'm saying right now could be presented in a version that contains 50% fewer words, and you need that when you're creating videos. You need that concise description that you can only get by having a script.
Right. Almost breaks it down to bullet points and, points of action versus anything else.
Yeah, and sometimes a script would be exactly that. Like, it would just be a list of information that needed to be included. It wouldn't be verbatim what a host was going to say.
So that kind of leads me to my other question. You've worked for some large media outlets. Doing so, what were your responsibilities?
So just to be clear, I spent 3 and some months years working specifically with Donut, but I was in a role where I managed a lot of the outside relationships, collaborating with other media outlets. So I worked with Leno's Garage, for example, right? And connected Donut with Leno's team. And so I was managing those relationships during the time that I spent at Donut. So there's a sense in which, my view is limited to just the view of someone who was employed at Donut specifically for a long time. But in that time, I was working with so many people at so many other organizations that I developed kind of a broader view of what's happening in the industry. And something that's really important with that is that, that the video that I made that went crazy, I didn't just make that without talking to anyone. I wanted to make sure that what I was describing was something that was relatable to other people in the industry. It was something that other people could say, yeah, no, that's describing a genuine experience that's happening in more places than one. Because I know my experience is pretty limited with respect to the entire industry, but I know enough people in other parts of the industry that I was able to hey, does this sound reasonable to you? Does this sound familiar at all? And so I made sure to confirm things like that before putting that video out.
It does, again, kind of makes people think just from a viewer standpoint of the hosts are a smaller number of people for these large outlets, but there's still gigantic or large teams, in fact, behind a lot of these things. And like you said, you're not catering, but you're wanting to bring those teams to the forefront a bit more, because we've seen, as you said in your video, and this is just me saying this, almost a corporate mentality be leaked into these media outlets a little too far. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's totally right. And the funny thing is that from the audience perspective, I think the audiences are sometimes surprised by how many people are working behind the scenes at a place like Donut.
Mm-hmm.
And then within media creation, people who work in that field tend to be surprised by how few people there are working at Donut. Because it really is, it's a small number of people working on it if you know how media is made. But if all you know about media is what you see, you tend not to realize exactly how many people there are. And Donut's, for the type of content they make, Donut is honestly, creative-wise, production-wise, has a relatively lean crew.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why they're so affected if one or two or three people leave over the same time period, because it's oh crap, now we've got to pick up all this extra work that previously was everybody was kind of working as hard as they could.
Right. Like we kind of alluded to before, one of those on the house of cards, one of the cards falls, it can very easily lead to a scramble to try to pick up the pieces.
It seems like they were working as hard as they could, but with passion. And unfortunately, maybe they would get replaced with someone who doesn't have the same passion, but maybe is really good at the job. And it's not going to translate the same in a way.
Yeah, to some extent that's true, because I think that there were people who were hired based on having experience within media, but they didn't really they weren't interested in cars specifically, right?
Yeah.
And so they didn't have that specialized knowledge. And that's not always a bad thing, because, you know, your accountant doesn't need to know cars. Like, that's
Correct.
you know, that doesn't matter. But the closer they are to the creative and the production process, the more challenging that can become. You know, because, for instance, we'd be working on some project where we're going to have a car loaned to us that, you know, exceeds the maximum coverage of our insurance, right? The person who handles the insurance doesn't necessarily know that. And the people who are managing the relationship with the car owner in production doesn't necessarily know, you know, that the limit on the insurance doesn't cover the total cost of that car.
Right.
And part of my role was, in some ways, bridging those gaps. Like, being a producer in the pre-production part was just like checking all that stuff off and be like, okay, let's check with the insurance guy and see if this is actually covered, you know, this car that's insanely expensive and they have no idea what it's worth.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because that's in the event something unfortunate happening and those T's are not crossed, etc., then suddenly that media company is responsible for who knows what.
Right, exactly. And, you know, and I certainly don't understand insurance liability to a high enough level to do someone's job that pertains to that. But as a producer, you have to know enough about kind of everything that's going on to be able to see those problems and intervene before they turn into disasters.
It truly is, you know, even though it's in the automotive niche, it truly is, for lack of a better term, a Hollywood production in some cases.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, we had to deal with, you know, the stuff that you hear about on film sets, like getting permits, you know, for shooting at places, and, you know, renting really expensive, um, uh, like video cameras and other equipment to make sure that the recordings were, you know, that it was stuff that we could be proud of the quality of the footage that we're making. And so there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes that was very much like film and television looking stuff while we're making YouTube videos.
Yeah.
It's like you creating like hundreds of micro movies. You know, like you said, I think you said in your video, like you were responsible for participating in like 160 something videos over your course of your time at Donut. And like each one of those, in the scale of it, is producing like a micro movie
Right.
on like a faster paced scale. But everything behind the scenes, even though, like you said, it's just a YouTube video, is still done to the level of like a full-fledged film.
Yeah, that's right.
Scripts, production, you know, permits,
Right.
equipment, everything.
I was going to say, I have to assume that, you know, with each script, there was a beginning, middle, and end, and then, or potentially a beginning, middle, end to a series as well.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we spent a lot of time thinking about storytelling. You know, I think that a lot of automotive creators don't necessarily have to do a lot of that because they're showing something that's very practical. We
Yep.
found that if we just kind of set up a scenario and pointed a camera at it and hoped something interesting would happen, it wouldn't be that interesting. And so we had to make sure that there was enough supplementary material, regardless of what happened when we pointed the camera at the event, that we could make something compelling out of it regardless. So, for instance, we did a number of shows where we gave away cars, but people had to repair the cars, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, in and of itself, that's a very contrived situation because, you know, we would ambush the car, we would make things that are wrong with it. But we would do that as a way to explain how vehicle systems work and how you do diagnostics when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with a car. And so the hosts would have to have material that explained all of those relevant details. And we found that out the hard way, because the first time we did it, we thought we would get somebody in to work on the car and they're going to be a mechanic and you could just point a camera at them and they'd be able to explain what they're doing while they're doing it, while there's a clock running and there's a free car on the line. And it turns out, no, most people cannot do that.
Right. Right. So the hosts had to basically play another role of, you know, keeping things together and going, and delivering that, both entertainment and that information at the same time.
Exactly. It was, you know, it was making sure that all the videos had some substance to them. And it
Mhm.
wasn't just like, you know, we're going to roll a car down a hill and watch it explode. Not that there's anything wrong with that as entertainment. Like, I mean, I'm fine with that, but we
Right,
wanted
right.
to do something more. And this is something that James Pumphrey described as nutritional value. Like, everything we made, we wanted to have some form of nutritional value so that the audience would come away from that video having learned something, but not necessarily knowing they had, just because it was so much fun to watch.
Right. Bits that they can pull away from, bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, exactly. It was, and one of the big inspirations for us was Mythbusters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Mythbusters was such a good show that none of us as fans realized we were watching a children's science show.
That's true.
You're right. And I mean, still to this day, I cite things I've learned from Mythbusters.
Yeah, it was a genius show.
Yeah.
It's a great show. Yeah, and the delivery of it was like entertaining, but at the end you're like, yeah, I know that. I can't even think of a myth right now, but I know that's not true because of X, Y, and Z.
Right. A handful of different things.
And I could have Googled it and read it 10 times. I would have never remembered it.
And it certainly, if you did, it certainly wouldn't have caught you and drew you in the same way.
Yeah.
And it didn't overstay its welcome. It was like they gave you just enough information, and that was really what, when I talk about how you have to understand the audience as a writer, like that's really what that amounts to, is not giving more information so they're going to check out, but giving enough information they feel satisfied that their questions have been answered.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have a particular time limit on that, or was it a general, place to land versus anything else?
It changed over time, and it depended on, what we were talking about specifically with, because like when Donut had series like Up to Speed and Bumper to Bumper, and Wheelhouse, we had certain durations that we were sort of shooting for with those, which were usually between 12 and 18 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
Up to Speed certainly could go longer if there was enough meat to the story. And then you look at something like Hilo and their Hilo episodes, and Hilo is the series where they, get two identical cars and put expensive parts on one and cheap parts on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Hilo episodes definitely could go longer. They could go on to like half an hour if there was enough substance to what had happened when they tried to do the modifications and then test them. But generally speaking, we rarely wanted to make a video that was less than 10 minutes. And we rarely wanted to make a video that was more than, say, 25 or 30 minutes, because we found that was kind of like, there's like a diminishing returns once you go longer than that.
Right.
Where it's really tough to hold an audience for more than half an hour with a YouTube video.
Yeah, it's like using those YouTube analytics in your favor.
Right.
You can see like, hey, how long are people watching for?
Yep.
And you're going to make a video that's twice as long as anyone's watching and put twice the amount of work into it, but no one's going to see it.
It's not going to, right there. Or you could break them up in two and have double. So taking a step away from the production line of things, we're in 2024. What is your opinion on the state of on the industry of automotive media?
Right now, I feel like the industry is in flux. I feel like there are a lot of changes that have happened over the last couple of years with large players emerging like Haggerty.
Mm-hmm.
Haggerty really stepped up their media. Getting Jason Camisa on board was a huge part of that. And I think that they're making some really amazing content.
Yep.
And then we have other huge players that are, significantly on the decline or have declined, like Hoonigan, for example. Their media has really just kind of stopped, and they still produce this versus that, but everything else is kind of gone. All the on-screen personalities are gone, and so it's hard to imagine that Hoonigan is ever going to return to what it once was. Right.
I mean, and you can even say that with, I don't want to say things on a grander scale, but like, look at Top Gear, for instance. Top Gear was Clarkson, Hammond, May, and they had multiple iterations after the fact, and some of that spark in some ways was recreated with Harris and things, but that would be more from a personal opinion, because it wasn't ever drove into the pop culture that it once was. Because I think, and my point with this is, the personalities are a huge factor to that. So Hoonigan losing all those people is a significant impact. You can't just try to recreate that special sauce once again.
Yeah, that's totally correct. Hoonigan can't just like relaunch with new hosts and expect to achieve just pick up where they left off. There's no way they could do that. if Hoonigan wants to relaunch as a media brand, they've got to bring something new to the table that still feels like it belongs under that brand, but isn't trying to do what they did before, because people will turn on them if they do.
Right. Unfortunately, yeah, it's just truly the book has to be closed on that, that version. It has to reestablish itself in some other way. Is that, just something like that? Is that, in your opinion, kind of caused by the industry growing? And that's a natural progression, because nothing is going to last forever, right? And what I really thought about earlier today was I've been a BMX kid, or was a BMX kid, all my life. And I kind of seen it with BMX in particular. Started off pretty slow, but then when I was younger and riding, suddenly X Games was a thing. And then the next thing I know, there, within, let's call it 5 years to a decade, there are Slim Jim commercials with some of my favorite BMXers. There are video games, all that sort of stuff. And that bubble grew and grew and grew. And it's still somewhat there, but it's not what it was at that peak. Do you kind of feel that same thing potentially happening with the automotive media industry or automotive industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think so. I saw the same thing happen with skateboarding, because that's what I was into.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
it's sort of like, when you're interested in something like that, you want it to achieve a level of success and popularity so it can sustain itself.
Yep.
But then the risk is it'll become a victim of its own success, right? And I think we saw that happen with BMXing, with skateboarding. And I think to some extent we saw that happen with some of the bigger automotive media channels. And I think to some extent, this is what a lot of the complaints are about Donut lately, is that when Donut went from having 1 million views, 1 million subscribers, to 8 million subscribers, they had to start thinking about their audience differently and who that audience might be. Because the level of interest from, 1 million highly specialized viewers who are deeply interested in cars, to 8 million viewers who are kind of interested in cars. They like cars, but they may not know as much as those initial 1 million. You can't make the same content for both of those groups, right? And so if you're going to grow and you're going to survive, and your audience, your audience kind of outgrows itself in some respects, right? Mm-hmm. And if you want to stay on top of it, and people want to keep their jobs, and creators want to create the best content they can create, you've got to change the way you think about the audience, and that alienates people. And I think that the same thing actually happens with automotive manufacturers, and some of them know it, because every time you do the next generation of a car, it's got to be better than the one before it. And then every time they do that, half the time the people say, "Oh, well, that's not a real 911 anymore. That's not a real Corvette anymore," right?
Right.
And I'm of the opinion that, like, adding coolant didn't ruin the 911, right? Like, that didn't, because it's still a good car. It's not identical to the car it was before, but it's still a good car, right? And so there's this thing that we do where we think that there's a spirit to something, and we try and hang on to it desperately, whereas the people who are dealing with these living creations have to sort of like move with the current circumstances they're in, and we struggle. It's a bind.
It truly is, and we hear this from all facets, right? Musicians, artists, things in that particular vein. We always hear the term sellout. That's always been the term, sellout. Oh, they sold out. They sold out. They changed their sound. They changed, their content, whatever it might be.
They went corporate.
Right. Exactly. But like, as a creator, as an artist, I'm sure that person is like, well, I can't, I'm going to hate my life if I continue to do the same exact thing for the next 50 years.
Yeah, totally. And, I saw a lot of creators do this, and we did this at Donut, where we do something and it was successful, and we think, oh, okay, let's just do that again. And nobody liked it. They'd already seen it, And so it's like, you have to do the familiar but different every time. And that is a struggle.
Same but different.
And to a potentially evolving, changing, and growing audience. Because that, for one, I think of I watch some of LZ's videos, and every now and again I'll find comments on there or whatever about people who were with him for years. And a lot of those comments happen to be, oh, I love growing with this channel, which is, again, a perspective I've never really thought about is, wow, this person started watching his stuff when they were 14 years old, and fast forward, they're 24 and can now, I don't drink a breezy. You know what I mean? It's just something completely different. And in a way, it's good to see. But again, everybody's constantly evolving. I guess that's true to everything.
And it's such a tough line to walk. Like, there are creators who do it. I think Chris Fix is a great example. You know, Chris Fix's content has stayed true to who he is and what he makes this entire time.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm also convinced that there's 4 of him, and that's why he wears the helmet. You don't know.
Separate shifts.
It's, all right, I'm gonna this is it for Monday, Chris Fix. I'm gonna hand it over to Tuesday, Chris Fix. I mean, it's insane, like the level of work that he takes on and the amount of stuff that he does. And he does have a small number of people who help him and support him through that, but he's still so deeply involved with all of the things he creates. And you know, I think even 2 years ago, he had more subscribers on YouTube than any other automotive creator. He finally got surpassed by Supercar Blondie within the last couple of years. And again, that's somebody who has a thing, you know, that she does, and she's good at it and has achieved success as a result. You know, but she couldn't just make the exact same thing over and over, because then people would stop watching. It's got to be a new car every time, you know, it's got to be something new with something unique to be said about it.
Yeah, there is certainly a formula to retain that audience, but still make it new and fresh, like you said. Change something in some way.
Yeah, and you know, you change too much, and that's when people start to get alienated. I think the C8 Corvette is a great example, right?
Right.
You know, people were absolutely up in arms about a mid-engine Corvette, and my own view on this was that that Chevy had kind of gone as far as they could with a front-engine Corvette, and if the next generation needed to be substantially better than the C7, they had to really think about completely changing the layout of the car, right? And if they did that, they could make something that really was a huge improvement over the C7.
Yeah.
Pissed a lot of people off, of course, because in their minds, you know, Corvette's got to be front engine, rear wheel drive, V8, even though that's ahistorical because the original ones weren't. You know, but, you know, and it certainly couldn't be mid-engine and a hybrid, you know. But guess what? The car sells like crazy and everybody loves it.
I was gonna say, it's one of the most common cars. It's crazy how often I see those things in form of sports car, things like that. It's multiples daily. It's just wild.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, we talked about it when they launched on here. I think we were kind of beaming at its success of what was it, its entry point at like 60K or whatever it was. And however that happened. And we kind of talked about, this is going to be like, listen, looks aside, it's different for sure, but it's gonna play itself out, and people are gonna be a big fan of it. Once they kind of get behind the wheel of it.
Right, like we alluded to. Oh, what are they gonna say? Oh, Chevy sold out.
Yeah,
and then you know, a few months down the road, they're everywhere.
Yeah, Chevy went corporate.
Yeah. And you know, the funny thing about that starting price point of $60,000, supposedly Chevy lost on every base model Corvette lost $20,000.
Wow. Oh, jeez.
But they priced it that way because they knew there was going to be this initial hostility. And if there were rows of C8 Corvettes sitting unsold on dealer lots, like that would have been horrible for them. They needed to get the car out there to change people's minds. And so they said, we're going to design this car that's incredibly different. People are going to be hostile, but we're going to make it incredibly easy for people to get. And when they get it, they'll see the difference.
Right.
You know, and that is a truly bold way, when you're a multi-billion-dollar company, to deal with a transition that could be very, very difficult.
I mean, a company that size, you can gamble on like addition by subtraction.
Yeah.
You know, subtracting the price by adding your market share.
We'll take that. We'll take that hit for the first model year or two. Just to gain that long-term popularity and continue that love for it.
As many times have I seen them. If it's far enough away, I'm still Corvette or Ferrari.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not quite sure until it's 2 yards in front of you. So in regards to the video that you put out, that we covered a lot of that stuff in particular, but it's just, you know, the state of big automotive media. In regards to that, I know you received a lot of positive feedback. Was there some negative feedback? And you don't have to get into specifics of who or what, but can you kind of elaborate a little bit on the negative side of that?
Of course, there's negativity. It's the internet, right?
Yeah.
Right. But by and large, there were, there's generally speaking, there were just a couple of categories of comments that I got a lot of, and I didn't think I was telling a totally new story for most people, right? I think that what I'm describing is something that a lot of people have experienced some or all of at some point in their working life. So, some of the comments that I got that were negative were like, yeah, everybody knows this, right? But that was sort of offset by people who were so happy that it was explained in a way that so perfectly captured how they had felt going through those experiences, living through those experiences. And so it's not like I'm making some giant revelation here for many of the people who watch and like that video. It's that it's something that they're watching that is, relatable. So in the same way that we might watch a video that's doing, an engine swap on a car that we're well aware of that platform, we're still watching the video, even though we know everything that's in it, because it's a relatable experience. It's someone going through something that we ourselves have gone through. So I think that the comments I did get that expressed some negativity were sort of that, well, everybody already knows this, so what are you adding to the conversation, right? And then there was one comment I couldn't help but reply to. Can I swear here? Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Say whatever you want.
Yeah.
Fucking A. I got one comment with somebody that said, "Who fucking cares?" And I saw that comment come in, and I just replied. I said, 700,000 people so far.
I love it. Yeah.
The proof is in the pudding right there.
Drop it in the comments. Be like 1 million people so far.
Right? And that's the internet, right?
Yep.
It's like you get a lot of negativity for negativity's sake. And I feel like a lot of my colleagues and my friends who are still working at Donut have been receiving far too much of that, an alarming amount recently, because they're still tremendous creators and they still work with a great deal of integrity in how they do their job. And it's the internet, and these snowballs of negativity can just go so crazy out of control, because I think we see the protection of the screen in front of us, and we don't think there's a human being who's upset by what I just said. They might even cry, because as a creator, you're so connected with the things you create. Even if the company you work for that pays the bills for that creation might not be doing things that you like, it's still your creation in so many ways.
Yeah, and it's a very prideful and again, prideful and emotional attachment, a piece. Again, when you create something, it's out there, and you could feel whatever way about it. But to hear negative feedback regarding it, I'm sure, especially if it's repeated and things like that, it's very difficult to ignore all the time.
It is, and it's very like demotivating. Like, it makes you not want to put stuff out there because you know that you're going to face that criticism every time.
Right. What are some of the other? Do you have other videos planned? I know you alluded to it on your channel. Have you recorded anything else yet? Are you kind of letting things, dare I say, cool off for a little bit before you get back to it?
I did record something else, but I think I'm gonna go back and amend that, because that was something that was recorded well before the video hit 1 million views. I have 2, possibly 3 complete scripts for other videos that I'm gonna do. One of those is just about the kinds of traits that you need to have to succeed in automotive content creation.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's very specific things that everyone that I know who has succeeded has these specific traits. And one of the biggest ones that this came about because anytime someone would find out that I worked at Donut at like a car show or something, they always asked, "How do I get your job?" And after getting asked that a couple hundred times, I kind of developed a pretty good answer to that. And one of the biggest things is you have to become an expert at something other than cars that has nothing to do with cars.
Yeah.
And because everybody I worked with who was good at their job wasn't knowing cars. Their job was being an exceptional director, an exceptional editor, an exceptional writer, an exceptional mechanic, an exceptional comedian, right? That was their job. They were just fortunate enough to get a job doing that also involved something else they love, which was cars.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so it really is develop a skill that has nothing to do with cars. The other video that I've got in the pipeline right now is I want to talk about some experiences that I've had that a number of other creators have had working with EV startups.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Because EV startups are really trying to write their own playbook with respect to the relationship between automakers and the media.
Yeah.
And some of this is leaking back into bigger automakers where they're starting to do some of the same things. And it's a little bit worrying because that relationship seems to be changing in a way that suppresses honesty in automotive reporting.
Right. Which can drastically impact the industry overall. Because again, if you don't put the vehicle in the hands of people who can write something positive or negative about it, at least nothing negative can be written about it.
Yeah. And I think that one of the mistakes that EV startups are doing is thinking that they have control over that message.
Mm.
And the obvious reason why that's false is because once the product exists in the world, media companies can get the product. They don't need the support of the company to get the product.
Right.
Especially if you're big, if you're someone who has a good following. And, we saw this with Marquez Brownlee's review of the Fisker Ocean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about that because he'd been trying to get the vehicle from Fisker, and they kept putting him off. So he finally just went to a private owner and said, "Hey, can I shoot this thing with your car?" And Fisker found out that he'd done that, said, "No, please wait. This one has updated software."
Oh.
And his view was, I'm reviewing a product that you sold to a customer. My review couldn't be more fair.
Right.
So cry all you want about the latest software update fixing stuff. This is a product that you took money for from another person. So I'm reviewing that.
Yeah, it was delivered as is. What should be right. They're the allowance to cater to the specific journalist or marquise wasn't, given to the manufacturer. So what? Why should the customer be treated any differently?
Right. And that relationship between manufacturers and the media is a it's a mutualistic relationship. We kind of do need each other to fully be able to do our jobs well. But there isn't some huge power differential where members of the media really need PR departments to loan them cars to make car reviews.
Right.
It's a consumer product like any other consumer product. And, if you have the resources as a media creator, you can get the product without the company being involved. And honestly, that probably leads to a more fair review of the product.
I'd agree with that for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Because I used to hear about a lot of that stuff of, some people that won't be named, but like saying, oh yeah, it's a little tough to drag somebody through the rocks when they didn't create a good product when I'm at their facility having dinner and staying on their dime.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff.
100%. And that it's weird because that works in multiple ways, because when we did at Donut, we did a review of the VinFast VF8.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a private owner to loan us her car. And she was one of the kindest, nicest people I've ever met. And she was really proud of that car.
Mm-hmm.
She was, involved in like owners groups and so on and so forth. And we made that video. And at the end of the day, we're like, this sucks because this car is genuinely bad.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to hurt her. Like, we don't want to hurt her feelings because this car matters to her.
Right.
So even when you circumvented the company that has the vehicles, we identify so closely with cars. Many of us do, that it's like, how do I say the truth, which is bad, without hurting somebody?
Right. And I think that just is unfortunately I don't want to call it dark side, but the difficult part about journalism. And we see that in every aspect of it, from sports stuff to actual real world stuff to, the automotive world.
Exactly. And I thought about that with respect to what I had to say about, my experience working at Donut. And I was like, how do I tell the truth without hurting some people who are invested in this that I care about.
Right.
And it
right.
turned out that I kind of couldn't,
Mm.
you know, I needed to say what I had to say because it was true, even though it went against some of my friends' interests. And that was really hard to do.
Yep.
And I really wrestled with that. But ultimately, I felt like, no, I think this is something that's sufficiently compelling that I'm going to pick my message and my voice over their interests this time.
Yep. Yep. And as you know, you didn't have any other than the friends in those relationships, which I'm sure if they're friends, they'll kind of understand for to a certain point. Like you don't have any obligation to protect a
Right.
company by any means. So it just, if you felt this way and these are your experiences, there's nothing wrong with telling those.
Yeah. You know, I didn't want to make certain people's lives harder, you know,
Right. Right.
but that was kind of unavoidable in this case.
Mhm.
And I think that when the video went from, I went to bed on Monday night last week and it had like 1,200 views
Mhm.
and I had 50 new subscribers. And I was so happy about that. Like I was absolutely thrilled,
Right. That's
you know,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
the comments were great. Like the comments were really good. And then I woke up the next day and it had 13,000 views. By lunch, it was 40,000. And by the end of the day, it was like 150,000.
Mm.
And I'm like, shit, what have I done? You know?
Right. A bit of an uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Uh,
I was just stunned by that degree of attention being on this. And then immediately thinking, oh crap, what is this going to do to like this list of people that I like and care about? You know?
yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where a thought that I keep having regarding it is you just said what everybody was already thinking. You just happened to say it out loud.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and that's why I felt justified in saying it because of the people I'd spoken to where I'm like, I'm not nuts, am I? Like, is this something that you experienced? And everybody's like, yeah. And so one thing that happened immediately after I put that video out is dozens of people that I've worked with in the past were like, thank you. Thank you for saying this. You captured it, you know, nearly identical to what other people's experiences were. And I had one person who sent me a message a couple hours after I put it out and said, you know what? I had that exact video ready to shoot. I'd even done the thumbnail.
Oh wow.
So it was something that was more due than it was like, you know, a revelation.
Right, right. It was just yeah, a matter of time. If it wasn't somebody,
Yeah,
if it wasn't
right,
you, it was going to be somebody at some point.
right.
And with that, I wanted to also like, you know, we're kind of harping on um not necessarily the negative, but that side of things. Uh now where we're at, changes can be made. Things can be for those people that exist there still. Changes can be made. Things can be looked at and kind of questioned. Oh, wait, I never really thought about that. So maybe let's try this. And with that said, you also basically closed out your video by saying that your hope is that someone someday will come up to you and tell you that you were responsible or your words helped them with whatever it might be, their channel or
Yeah.
something along those words, something along those lines, which is a positive message to leave on.
Yeah, and you know, I regret that there wasn't enough positivity in that video about my experience at Donut, because I think I could have done a better job capturing how that had given me lifelong friendships, and how that had, you know, really propelled my career forward. And I got to meet some great people throughout the industry, got to have some amazing experiences as a result. Like, I don't regret anything about the time that I spent working with the creatives at Donut and automotive content creators across the industry. You know, that was not the message I wanted to give. And I'm kind of kicking myself for not having enough positivity in that video and enough stuff that actually helps people
Mhm.
to you know, to think about things differently and to think about how they can elevate themselves in their own careers and their own goals within that industry or other industries that it applies to.
What is something you'd like to close out with today? Is there any type of extra, you know, message you'd like to say now?
Well, I think that, you know, now that the channel has some attention, I can really get it back on track to where I want it to be, where it is providing information in a way that's like, hey, here's this insider information, but here's what you can do with that to help you reach your goals. You know, I want to really refocus on making that the main message of the channel and not like dishing dirt.
Right. Yeah, I completely understand that. And I think that's a very good place to stand. I mean, and you are very good at your job because you absolutely nailed the video with me, and it was served to me, and I consumed the whole thing at one time. Your message was there, and now knowing there's a script, I can absolutely say you nailed it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, the script exists so that I don't get nervous and get off track or go down weird tangents.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that's what this is for.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. You're right. The inside baseball sort of stuff.
Right.
Corey, do you have anything to close out before we?
Yeah, I gotta ask, what was your first car? What was some of the best cars you regret getting rid of, cars you currently own?
So my first car was a 1981 Mazda GLC.
Okay.
GLC, this was like one of the first Mazda compact sedans in the US. GLC stood for good little car, and it was barely any of those things. My current car is a BMW 128i.
Hey, all right. I actually had to get rid of mine. I still own mine, but after 10.5 years, it stopped being the daily driver. So,
well, you know what's funny is after I got mine, one of the editors at Donut drove it, and he bought one. And then they did a video a couple of months ago about like awesome cars you can still get that are under $10,000, and the first one on the list was the 128i because
absolutely, I watched the video.
But yeah, I've got a 128i. I absolutely love it. It's 2013, which was the final year for that car, which means it is the last BMW with hydraulic power steering.
I think I have to catch up at some point, maybe 10, 15 years down the road. I think that is going to be the new E30.
One of those. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And if you look at it like spec for spec, it's really comparable to an E36 M3, at least the US market one.
Yes, definitely. Very much
like
so.
Similar weight, similar power. The 1 Series has a slightly shorter wheelbase, but they're very similar.
Yeah.
Are you still under the SULEV warranty?
He might not have a SULEV.
Is that 120? No, it's a SULEV car. It is a SULEV car.
I think that's 150,000 miles.
I'm still in it. I'm at 118,000.
Get your work done.
I was just going to say, do everything you can, buddy.
Yeah.
It
was a happy accident for me.
I do tend to do as much of my own work as I can, because I found that, so for example, when I changed the ignition coils on that, which are a SULEV part,
absolutely,
but I changed them myself. And when I did that, I found that there was an old piece of coil that had snapped off in the spark plug well that some tech had left behind.
Oh, no.
So yeah, tend to do my own work.
I was gonna say, yeah, if it's your baby, you want to kind of keep it, keep it close.
And any cars you've gotten rid of over your time that maybe you're like, man, I wish I could get that one back?
I usually don't look back.
Okay.
I usually don't think, I should try and get another one or something. I tend not to repeat myself on cars. And I've had somewhere around 50 cars maybe in that neighborhood. The weirdest one, though, is what I bought as my very first track car, which was a Mark IV Volkswagen GTI 1.8 turbo. And I bought that car for $1,900. I took it to my very first track day that weekend. All I did to it was change the oil and get an alignment. And so I was like $2,200 in. And then I spent 3 years modifying it with only the cheapest parts I could find. So I had like $250 coilovers on it. And when I finally went to sell that car, I took all the stuff off of it, returned it to stock, and went for the test drive. And I was just like, man, I ruined this car. This is so nice. So if I've found a really nice condition, all original, unmodified Mark IV 1.8T, I would consider buying another one.
Fair.
That'd be the one.
Yeah.
That's
a good one. We all have a Volkswagen somewhere in our past.
Yeah, we all have owned a 1.8T in some way, shape, or form.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a prolific engine.
Yeah.
Is there a car? What dream car? What would your dream car be?
Okay, so you know how as car people we always like to pose this question, like what car would you buy with your own money if you had to keep it for the rest of your life?
Mm-hmm.
Right, but like unlimited funds. First generation NSX.
Okay.
Yep.
That
That's
would be it. Like
fantastic answer.
Yep.
that would be my forever car if I could afford one. Like I would happily drive that until the day I die.
And then take it to your grave.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's coming with me.
Yeah, certainly.
Keys are in the pockets.
It's just no one else's.
Yeah.
Where can everybody find you, and what can they find you doing in the coming weeks besides the Auto T YouTube channel?
So obviously the Auto T YouTube channel and my Instagram account, which is Tiernan.ai, I think. And then I run and co-own another automotive channel called Overdrive. It's based in the UK. It was originally kind of a Top Gear knockoff, and that turned out to be a financial disaster. So I then started working with the original owner, who's still, we work together daily on this, and we decided that we were going to relaunch doing the kind of content that channel started out making, which is informational videos about automotive technology or interesting stories about the history of cars and so on and so forth. So we relaunched that in January. A big audience change is a tough thing to go through because a lot of people, like I described, they feel betrayed when you've moved their cheese. And they don't necessarily warm up to it. But I view this one as a success because, as soon as I took over, it was the first month in a year and a half that the channel wasn't losing money. And so I feel like, yeah, we're getting fewer views, but we're spending 5% of what had been spent previously. And so we're in that process of rebuilding Overdrive into something that provides quality informational content for people who just want to learn more about cars and aren't necessarily interested in stunts or challenges or races or something like that, because so many people do that. So many people try to be the next Top Gear already.
Yeah.
I don't feel like we need another one.
Right. And which I think is I think it's a reflection of how great Top Gear was, because it inspired so many people to try to recreate it.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest books that I've read, at least professionally, is a book called And on That Bombshell.
Mm-hmm.
Because Top Gear throughout its entire run had the same script supervisor. So that was the person who was working with the hosts, working with other writers, working with Andy Willman, who created the show, and overviewing all of what made Top Gear behind the scenes. And his insight into automotive media and what it takes to be successful and what it's like to have an audience that starts to dislike you at times is so good. And reading that book will keep you going as a creator through the toughest times, because it happened to Top Gear.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get that book.
I was just going to say, and on that bombshell, I think it's a great place to end. Tiernan, thank you truly very, very much for joining us, taking the time out of your day to chat with us and give us your insight. And I think, don't let the negative side of things, or even the feelings you may have emotionally of like, did I do the right thing putting that out there? There's something to be said about that. But I think your message ultimately is more positive and will be more positive than negative, certainly in the future. So thank you very much. Everybody go check out his video if you haven't already. Join the millions that already have, and keep pumping those numbers up for him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I absolutely appreciate the kind words. Appreciate you having me on. It's been really fun.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks. Bye.